instantly called 911 when he saw Michael Jackson not breathing, that they could have saved him. Multiple steps that Conrad and Mary could have taken that could have saved Michael Jackson. That paramedic, that fire station was only like a mile and a half away. They could have gotten there. In fact, they did get there within 4 minutes of a call. Had he called them instantly, they say they could have saved him. And certainly there were tears in the courtroom from the Jackson family because of that. I want to tell you, right now I'm joined with Christopher Smith, a defense attorney who's been our legal analyst through these days of trial. 9 hours, that's how long the jury has deliberated. What does the length of time tell you?
Well, this length of time is not good for Dr. Murray. Typically, when you get a quick verdict like this, it's a guilty verdict. And, you know, this was a 22-day, I believe, trial. There were hundreds of exhibits, a number of witnesses who testified throughout this case. But it seems clear now that the jurors had essentially made up their minds about this case. And I think it's not going to bode well for Dr. Murray.
There was some speculation that the defense, in fact, had conceded the fact that they would not get a not guilty verdict, but in fact they were hoping that there would be that lone wolf, that single juror who could hold out so that they would at least have a hung jury.
Absolutely. You know, it takes 12 to render a verdict, and clearly had there been a single person holding out, you know, fighting for Dr. Murray for the not guilty, and if the jury ended up being hopelessly deadlocked, there would have to be a mistrial, and then we'd start this thing all over again.
So many indications from the jurors that they were very involved in the testimony, and there was so much they had to go through. It was at times extremely tedious, and I know you listened to a lot of this testimony. They had to learn a whole new vocabulary. They learned about gluconorides, they learned about metabolites, they learned about pharmacokinetics, and yet they hung in there. They were taking notes almost the entire time.
Yes, I mean, I think even if you look at the makeup of the jury itself, there's some pretty educated folks on there. I think there's even maybe a chemist who's a part of the jury. I'm sure that his background kind of helped illuminate.
I think it was her background.
Oh, I'm sorry, her background helped illuminate some of these issues that may have given other jurors problems. But what the prosecution did over and over again is just pointed out in so many ways where Dr. Conrad Murray just failed to adequately treat Michael Jackson. And at each stage, they continued to say that, hey, this was either gross negligence or he just acted totally outside the bounds of the standard of care of a normal physician.
What do you believe were the strongest points the defense was able to make?
Well, I think some of the strongest points they were able to make was the fact that they were able to humanize Dr. Murray in such a way where the prosecution tried to vilify him. I think that even in the witnesses that the prosecution put forward, the former patient, the former office assistant, the doctor they flew in from Houston, they all essentially sounded like Dr. Murray was a very good doctor. And it just seems to me in this particular instance, perhaps he used the wrong kind of care and treatment for Michael Jackson, but he's not necessarily this bad guy that the prosecution made him out to be.
One observer in the medical field who has testified at a number of these trials says that the fact that Dr. Murray was able to safely administer propofol for close to 2 months is an indication that he did know how to do it correctly.
I think that helped the defense as well. I mean, there was a two-month period where he administered it and everything was fine with Michael Jackson. It was only in this particular instance that things went wrong, which helps them in trying to indicate that, hey, it wasn't Dr. Murray who was responsible for the death of Michael Jackson, but Michael Jackson himself.
They argued somewhat a perfect storm, just a collision of events that happened, that for some reason Michael Jackson was more desperate than typical and ingested the propofol himself in some way, or self-administered the propofol and the lorazepam, 8 pills of lorazepam at some point when Dr. Murray wasn't looking, that he did this secretly, that he did this somehow in a stealth way that Dr. Murray was unaware of.
Well, I think the defense did a good job in pointing out how Michael Jackson was extremely concerned about the fact he wasn't able to get any sleep. He was concerned that the concerts would be canceled, that it was important for him to be there at these rehearsals, and that may have pushed him to the point where he administered the propofol himself, because simply what Conrad Murray was doing wasn't enough to get him to sleep. And so that moment where Dr. Murray stepped outside the room is when they believe that it happened.
The discussion and debate about Dr. Murray taking the stand, what do you think went on in those discussions with Dr. Murray?
Well, I didn't think there was any chance that he'd be taking that witness stand. And one of the benefits of playing that tape that was played in the court with the interview with the investigators was to able to allow Dr. Murray to tell his version of what occurred without having the benefit of being cross-examined, and it was in his own words. So in their closing, they could clearly point, hey, this is what Dr. Murray said would happen on that particular night and that morning, and according to their expert, that it was a plausible explanation of what happened to Michael Jackson.
As a defense attorney that's waiting for a verdict to be announced, what do you think is now going on in the minds of the lawyers who have been defending Conrad Murray?
Well, oftentimes, sitting there as a defense attorney, you feel some of the same anxiety as your client. I mean, you're nervous, you're anxious to hear what they have to say. I have a rule where I don't look at the jurors when they come out of that deliberation room. I stay focused on the judge, just because I wouldn't want to get a false impression or false reading, and want to hear it straight from the clerk when the verdict gets read. But I imagine that they're talking about different scenarios. Well, what will happen if there's a guilty verdict? Will the judge take Dr. Murray into custody? Will there be a sentencing hearing, put off to a certain date? Would motions will need to be filed, like motions for new trial, or even perhaps a request to ask the judge to consider setting aside the verdicts?
How difficult was it to present a defense case, given the fact that the lead attorney, he's from Houston, I think he had to take the bar in California in order to try this case?
Well, he wouldn't have to take the bar necessarily. There's a process, pro hoc vice, where you can make an application to the local state as long as there's a California attorney that's essentially sponsoring the attorney. So I imagine that's what happened.
There were a number of stops and starts in this case. Initially, Conrad Murray said he wanted a speedy trial 60 days after the preliminary hearing.
And that's the right of every defendant. When they're accused with a crime, they have a certain amount of time to go forward. Sometimes it's to the benefit of the defense, because if the prosecution isn't ready to go, you want to seize that opportunity and expose them for doing an inadequate investigation.
But it backfired because they weren't ready. The defense was not ready.
I think there were steps that the defense, missed for some reason. There were questions about whether or not, there were experts getting up there who were basically testifying that this was gross negligence, when that goes to the ultimate issue, and that seems to be an issue that the jury decides and not the expert. He should have been confined to testifying just about the standard of care. But the defense were allowing questions like that to be asked of these experts, which I found kind of shocking.
And they were not allowed to go into any history of Michael Jackson. There had been all these reports that Michael Jackson had been taking Demerol, that he had been receiving it from a skin doctor in Beverly Hills, and that as a result of this Demerol, he needed the propofol to sleep because that there was a side effect of the Demerol, this pain medication. Yet they were not allowed to keep. Okay, that's the last question.
Okay. Well, they weren't allowed to go into the Demerol issue, but it seemed to me that was a very important part of their case, because it seemed that they were going to be arguing that the Demerol was what caused the insomnia, and that everything that Dr. Murray was doing was conflicted by the fact of the Demerol, which he had no knowledge of. So when the judge ruled that inadmissible, I'm sure that damaged them.
Okay, Christopher Stibneth, thank you so much for helping us with our coverage here. And back to more developments from the studio.
All right, Miriam, thank you very much. And we are looking live at the Criminal Courthouse building in downtown Los Angeles from Air 7 HD. We talked a moment ago about Latoya Jackson and how she feels as she's approaching the courthouse, finally learning that a verdict is in. We saw that Michael Jackson's parents had arrived. We're also getting word now, and of course there's another major player in this, and that is Dr. Murray. We've spoken with a source close to Dr. Murray who said that the doctor is, quote, very nervous, anxious, nerve-wracking. end quote. So you can just imagine what Dr. Murray is going through, even as the family is on pins and needles now trying to figure out what is going to happen. Dr. Murray charged with 1 count of involuntary manslaughter. We've mentioned that the maximum he can face is 4 years in prison if convicted, but we also have learned through our legal experts the likelihood of that, given no prior convictions, no criminal history, that is probably not going to happen. We don't know. Sentencing is, even if he's found guilty, is some distance in the future.
Okay, so, and if you're just joining us, you can see other members of the Jackson family, Randy Jackson, another brother possibly there as well, and walking into the courthouse. So we've got Joe Jackson, Catherine Jackson, Jermaine Reeby, Latoya tweeted that she's on the way. We haven't seen her come in yet, and Randy there, and possibly someone else. I couldn't recognize that person, but most of the members of the Jackson family in the courthouse right now. And of course, Philip mentioned the information we've gotten from a source talking about how Conrad Murray is feeling at this point, you know, very nervous and anxious, understandably. We are waiting for about another half an hour until the verdict is read at 1 o'clock. We're going to bring that to you live at 11 a.m. The jurors came back and said that they do have a verdict in this case.
So let's restart here. We've been on the air now since 11 a.m., brought you that breaking news that a verdict was reached, and this is now special coverage of the Dr. Conrad Murray trial regarding the death of Michael Jackson back in June of 2009. We've waited some 6 weeks through testimony. Murray has been the subject of much debate and discussion since Michael Jackson's death in June of 2009 and his care of him. So we're going to wait. We're going to carry it for you live. We'll have it here. It will also be available at abc7.com, streaming live on the internet if for some reason you cannot be near your television. We want to go to Rob Hayes. He is outside the courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. Rob, what can you tell us?
Philip, we're in the pit, affectionately known as the pit. This is the area where media is just swarming. You'll see some podium set up here, a mic stand set up. After a verdict is read, if there are going to be any news conferences, any kind of statements or speeches by either side, we're told will be right down here. So we're positioned to get those as soon as that happens after the verdict. Right now, I mean, you take a look around. We're right in front of the courthouse. This is the scene you're looking at right now is the way into the courthouse. This is where the Jackson family walked in a short time ago. We just saw Randy Jackson probably about 3 or 4 minutes ago walk in. We're still waiting to see Latoya and Janet Jackson. But again, as soon as a verdict is read, this is the spot where we've been told any news conferences will be held. Apparently we have someone coming in right now.
Latoya just tweeted she's on her way.
Okay, we've been told that Latoya just tweeted that she's on her way to the courthouse right now, so we're going to be waiting and in position to see when she arrives.
Okay, Rob Hayes, thanks very much for that. So we are awaiting the arrival of Latoya Jackson and any other members of the Jackson family for this verdict that's going to be read in about 30 minutes from now. We are joined again by Dana Cole. He's been with us since the beginning. He's an LA criminal defense attorney. We were talking earlier about Conrad Murray and the information we got that he was, quote, nervous and anxious, and this is a nerve-wracking situation, of course. What can you say about that, having represented defendants for many years?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been through this process about 150 times in a jury trial, and it is extremely nerve-wracking. For Conrad Murray, last night could have been the last night that he slept in a regular bed, and believe me, he's well aware of that. For an attorney, you invest so much time, effort, emotional capital in these cases representing these clients. I mean, you work morning, noon, and night on these trials. So yeah, it's extremely nerve-wracking for everybody because the bottom line is you don't know what their decision is, and it's going to change someone's life regardless.
And one thing I think of with, you know, you have spoken specifically about Dr. Conrad Murray and the lack of any criminal history. In other words, he's not ever been in the system, so to speak. I would think for a career criminal maybe, that would have one impact when they go, okay, they've got a verdict. But for somebody who's never been anywhere around this, I would think that would be magnified tenfold at least.
Absolutely. And Philip, I mean, think about how he sat in this courtroom for 6 weeks, hearing his reputation just get tarnished and crashed and burned and devastated day in and day out. Do you know how hard that must be to listen